You order food, you tap a button on your phone, and a little while later, it shows up at your door. Super simple, right? But behind that simple tap, there's this huge trail of data. Your location, what you like to eat, how much you spend, all of it. Today, we're going to dig into what happens when that data gets used and how doing the right thing with it is about way more than just following the law. It's about being fair. Just let that sink in for a second. What if? It's a really powerful question, isn't it? Because it takes this big kind of abstract idea of data ethics and makes it super personal. Suddenly, we're not talking about servers and code. We're talking about you getting your dinner on time based on some hidden decision you didn't even know was being made. Okay, let's get into it.
So where does a problem like this even come from? Well, it almost never starts with someone having bad intentions. To really get to the bottom of it, we have to look at the hidden downside of the data we collect every single day.
Usually, the goal is something totally positive, right? Like making the app work better or giving you recommendations you'll actually like. But even when you're trying to do good, the data you gather can lead to outcomes that are really unfair or even harmful. And that's the key thing to get. The risk is always there, even when you think you're helping. Okay, so if we know these risks are out there, how do we even begin to deal with them? For that, you need a framework. And I'm not just talking about a legal checklist that tells you what you can do, but an ethical one. A guide that helps you figure out what you should do. Let's call it our ethical rulebook. And what I love about this idea is how simple it is at its core. Data ethics isn't really about memorizing a bunch of complicated rules. It's a mindset. It's about constantly asking yourself, is this the right thing to do? Is this fair? Are we being responsible here? It's like the human layer that sits right on top of all the tech. And that mindset, it's really built on these core ideas. It means you have to actively work to make sure your models aren't biased against certain groups. It means you have to be able to explain why an algorithm made the decision it did. And of course, it's about only using data for what you said you'd use it for, trying your best to avoid any harm, and this is a big one, taking responsibility for the outcome.
All right, theory is great, but let's make this real. We're going to take our new rulebook and apply it to a case study. Let's imagine a food delivery app. We'll call it Hungry Now.
Now, if you look at what Hungry Now is doing, it all seems pretty standard. They're looking at your order history to suggest new restaurants. They're using GPS to keep an eye on their drivers. They're analyzing delivery times by area to get faster. This is all just normal business stuff. But this is exactly where those tricky ethical questions start to pop up. And this is where it gets interesting. Recommending food seems helpful, but did the customer actually agree to have their data used for marketing? Monitoring drivers sounds smart for efficiency, but is it really fair to judge the performance based on GPS data alone, without knowing if they hit a massive traffic jam? And flagging slow areas to improve service? What if that just ends up penalizing lower-income neighborhoods, creating a cycle of bad service? See the tension? So, just spotting these problems is a huge first step. But the really important part is what you do about it. So let's shift gears from just identifying risks to actually fixing them. This is a simple process anyone can use. First, before you even write a line of code, you ask, who could this affect? Then, you only collect the absolute bare minimum of data you need to get the job done. As you're building your model, you actively test it for bias. You make sure its decisions aren't some mysterious black box you can't explain. And finally, you write everything down, so you have a record of the choices you made. It's all about building ethics in from the very start.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds like a lot of extra work. But let me tell you about a specific incident at Hungry Now that shows just how critical this process is. It all came down to this one quote from an analyst.
So the data came in, and the initial analysis was pretty blunt. It flagged one specific area, Zone 3, as being way slower than everywhere else. The obvious business move would be to penalize the drivers in that zone, right? Or maybe even stop delivering there. But instead, they decided to run it through their ethics check.
They asked that crucial question, is there missing context here? And what they found changed everything. Turns out, the slowness had nothing to do with the drivers. It was because of a localized storm that day, plus 2 of the biggest restaurants in that zone were totally slammed with orders. The data was telling a story, but it wasn't the true story. By pausing to ask that one question, they avoided unfairly punishing their drivers and making service even worse for customers. And here's the kicker. After they figured this out, they built a new system that could account for things like weather and restaurant delays. And guess what? Customer complaints in that area actually dropped by 12%. So being ethical wasn't just the nice thing to do, it directly led to a better product and happier customers. That's a win-win.
So,
How can you start putting all of this into practice? Let's wrap things up with a simple toolkit you can basically put in your back pocket.
Think of this as your cheat sheet. On the do side, always try to collect as little data as possible. Test for fairness. Make sure you can explain your models. Document your decisions. And on the don't side, never reuse data for something else without asking first. Don't publish raw location data. And, like we saw with Hungry Now, never ever penalize someone without understanding the full context. It's a pretty straightforward guide for making much better choices.
And these are really the key ideas that make that guide work. Data minimization, informed consent, algorithmic bias, explainability, and privacy by design. When you understand these terms, you have the language you need to have these really important conversations and to build fairer, better systems right from the get-go.
So, I want to leave you with a final thought, a question to take with you. The next time you're looking at a dashboard or spreadsheet or any kind of data, just stop for a second and ask yourself, what hidden story is my data telling? And what can I do to make sure it's the true one?